You're watching StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and it's a pleasure to see Professor Yoichiro Sato. He's a professor at the Graduate School of Asia Pacific Studies at the Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University in Beppo in the island of Kyushu. Professor Sato, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Professor Sato, wanted to get your views on new Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, his first foreign visit to now Vietnam and then subsequently to Indonesia. How significant is it, especially when he's made comments on the necessity for a free and peaceful Indo-Pacific? And we know both Vietnam and Indonesia have had problems, like many of the other countries, in terms of territorial claims that China has had.
Well, for Japan, at the time when the Sino-US rivalry is intensifying over first trade disputes and then with the coronavirus pandemic, especially its origin, which is a very hard thing to determine anyway. And now it's spreading into some high-tech sectors, which does affect Japan's trade with both US and with China. So Japan is really trying to walk on a tightrope, balancing its strategic interests for security at the time China's threat is rising. But at the same time, Japan's economic relation with China is very strong, and it's not something Japan could easily cut off. And so for Japan to balance the two positions is very important. And when that interest is projected onto its approach towards Southeast Asia, Vietnam and Indonesia are two most important states for Japan in terms of attempting to shape the collective stance of the ASEAN countries vis-a-vis China. At the time, the growing threat of China in the South China Sea is a threat to global commerce.
Professor Sato, now a defense agreement has been reached with Vietnam between the two prime ministers after their summit. We may not know the exact details of what platforms will be exchanged, but in the past there have been Coast Guard vessels that have been provided by Japan to Vietnam. So defense cooperation is increasing with Vietnam, and that's something that Beijing will not be very happy about.
Beijing is definitely unhappy about this, but Japan is sending a very clear message to China against China's very assertive policy on the South China Sea, especially the island reclamation and their fortification. And most recently, Japan sent one of its new aircraft carrier look-alike vessel, and also escorted by a modern submarine. And they made a port call to Vietnamese port and the Cam Ranh Bay, and after that they joined the U.S. Navy to conduct anti-submarine warfare exercise in the South China Sea, which is a very clear message that the cooperation among Japan, U.S., and Vietnam will counter China's aggressive naval provocations in the South China Sea.
Professor Sato, you were mentioning how Japan needs to balance the security aspect and the economic aspect with China. Well, we do know that even under Abe Shinzo, the Prime Minister, there was a fund that was set up to, I think, $2.5 billion to move out supply chains, Japanese firms from China, as well as I think a part of that fund would be given to firms from other countries. Now, there's an economic angle as well to Vietnam in terms of agreements that have been reached, which are on similar lines. And we've seen Vietnam emerging as a key destination for the movement of any kind of manufacturing or other units from China, right?
Yes, Vietnam will be a primary beneficiary of this the divestment effort by both the United States and Japan, and some of the manufacturing operations will migrate to Vietnam. And to facilitate that process, the kind of infrastructure assistance are forthcoming from Japan, especially. But at the same time, I think there are some limits. I think Vietnam's the number of available labor is not as big as China, and also many of the Japanese investors in China they counted for the domestic market and domestic sales inside China, and and those are not available to the same degree in Vietnam. So many Japanese companies have actually already expressed that they're not going to take the Japanese government subsidy to divest out of China. So some of them will definitely stay in China. So
Right. When you're talking about labor and Vietnam not being able to provide the necessary labor, India could provide necessary skilled labor, but there would be other issues, right? Or can India become a destination to move Japanese firms out of China?
yeah, I think to some degree, India can absorb the would-be investors from Japan instead of China. And I think the infrastructure assistance will play a key role in India as well. And India and Japan together are talking about connecting the East African states through the maritime infrastructure. So, so the manufacturing operation in Eastern African countries are also in the foresight, I think.
The next leg of Prime Minister Suga's foreign tour will be Indonesia, and President Joko Widodo there. Again, we are expecting defense and economic agreements, and probably a date to be announced for the next 2+2 meeting between the foreign and
Mhm.
defense ministers of the two countries, which again uh, illustrate the crux in terms of security policy that Japan needs to
Mhm.
have, right?
Yeah, the Indonesia is also the other critical state within Southeast Asian bloc, and partly because Indonesia controls three choke points: Malacca Strait, Sunda
Sunda
Strait,
Lombok.
and Lombok Straits, and those are very important for Japan's commerce with not only the Middle East for oil and gas, but also with Australia for some critical natural resources and other products trade. And of course, strategically, those straits are also important for the US naval operation as well. So for Japan to have a good relationship with Indonesia is very important. And it's a good news for Japan that Indonesia's stance on the South China Sea issue vis-à-vis China has toughened in the last few years. And this will make Indonesia as a potential very strong partner for Japan for security.
The key partner, of course, is the US, and I presume Prime Minister Suga would have wanted maybe it's, if not his first, but one of his first foreign visits to be the US, but they are preoccupied with elections. Does if there is any change in the White House, does that make any difference to Japan US ties?
I think Japan-US cooperation within this the Indo-Pacific framework
Yeah.
will probably be easier under Biden.
Okay.
And although the Trump is the one who kind of signed on to Abe's initial proposal of the Indo-Pacific concept, the U.S. has been acting in a rather incoherent manner, and also its commerce strategy is not in sync with the military strategy. and Vietnam is still on the potential sanction list for the U.S. for the currency manipulation and so forth. But the Democrats, they will likely to follow the Obama administration's more comprehensive approach to the region, and probably military-wise, U.S. is not gonna be as soft as it was during the Obama period because Trump has already raised the stake, and it's very difficult to come down so easily. And places like Taiwan has been really elevated in significance in the U.S. foreign policy. And things like that cannot go back to 4 years ago. But still, I think it will be easier for Japan to work with Biden and try to walk the kind of tightrope balancing the economic interest and military strategic interests under this configuration.
You were talking about elevation. Now, the recent meeting of the Quad in Tokyo has been incremental kind of elevation in how the Quad deals multidimensionally, even if it's so far only diplomatic speak. Security, economics, supply chains, technology, cyber, they're looking at various angles. But how important does Japan see the Quad and the relationship with India in particular, along with the US and Australia?
Oh, it's a very important framework, and the coordinating the policy stance among all these four key players over the issues you just mentioned, a very broad range of issues. It's very important, and it's important in a way that the US dealing with these partners bilaterally try to see things predominantly through military alliance terms, and those things are done at the neglect of allies' other interests, especially economic interests. And both India, Japan, and also Australia, they all have significant trade relations, investment relations with China, and those are not something you can just cut off just because the US wants to militarily contain China. So for that coordination, the Quad framework is very important.
And just to look back to Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, and when he announced his resignation for the second time, he said that he apologized to the Japanese people for leaving some tasks undone. Well, two of them would, of course, be relations with Russia and South Korea. How do you see his successor taking forward those policies, especially if there are elections coming up or snap elections that have to be announced?
Well, I think the policy toward Russia is going to face a setback, and any kind of quick resolution, which some anticipated during Abe, is much less likely to happen now under Suga. And I don't think Suga has a strong drive to pursue this issue. And with South Korea, Suga has been saying, and the Jiji Newswire has been reporting that Suga doesn't want to go to the trilateral summit with China and Korea. And so if that's the case, again, I think Japan is trying to keep some distance from Korea unless the Korean side start making some concessions. So it will be difficult between the two countries, and that part of the diplomacy will continue from Abe to Suga period.
Professor Yoichiro Sato, Thank you so much for your experience and your time.
Thank you.
You can get on to our website to get the latest news and analysis from an Indian perspective. Do support our kind of journalism again, and you can do that again on StratNews. You've been watching StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi.